Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I particularly like to thank anyone who was part of last night's initial meeting of Alexandria's Energy and Climate Change Task Force. David Peabody and I really appreciate your work on that, and also appreciate your being such gluttons for punishment on attending community meetings related to climate change. My name is Scott Barstow, and I live in Northwold Town. And I've been very happy to work with David on hosting this webinar as part of our efforts to support Alexandria's transition to a zero carbon community through changes to our built environment. I first got to know David probably 14 years ago or so, maybe 15. And tonight kind of feels like coming full circle to me because I met him when I first joined Alexandria's Environmental Policy Commission, when he gave all of us a tour of a passive house that he had built in Bethesda. And I'll never forget that experience because it was my first time seeing a passive house in person, and it really blew me away. Hang on, I'm going to have to switch something here. So I'm just going to spend a couple minutes providing some context before we turn it over to Shanti Pless. He'll talk for about 20 minutes. We'll turn it over to Jonathan Arnold, and then finish up with some Q&A and try and wrap up in about an hour. So for those of you that attended our last webinar, you'll recognize this slide. We are in a climate emergency. The city of Alexandria has recognized that. Many other governments have recognized that. And this graph shows how close we're getting to losing any chance of limiting global warming to acceptable levels defined as around 1.5 degrees C. That upward trending red line needs to slow down and stop ASAP. This is also a slide that you will recognize if you attended our previous webinar. So the UN Environment Program produces an emissions gap report showing how close or how far we're coming to limiting our emissions of greenhouse gases and sufficiently to avoid catastrophic changes. And what this shows is that for quite some time, we all here in the US have been emitting far more than residents of any other country on average in our per capita greenhouse gas emissions. So the general consensus is that to have a chance of meeting that 1.5 degree target and avoiding even higher levels of warming, worldwide we need to reduce emissions by about 50%, cutting them in half by 2030 in just 9 years. So it's not much of an exaggeration. In fact, I don't think it is an exaggeration to say that the next 9 years are a very, very critical period in human history. And to give you a even starker sense of the challenge in front of us, that 2030 target requires global average per capita emissions of about where India is here. And we're starting from up around here. So couple new slides from last time. So the Energy Information Agency releases the American Energy Outlook report each year. And this is a slide from their most recent report in February. And they project that absent any policy changes, which obviously we hope will happen, that energy-related carbon dioxide emissions will continue to go up, petroleum, natural gas, coal, and that will vary a little bit depending on economic growth, but that's a pretty flat line, obviously. It's not trending down. It's not like we have to speed up the trend that's already happening. We have to start creating that trend in earnest immediately. So for Alexandria, this is a slide that some of you may have seen last night, and it shows that for Alexandria, the way we're counting up our greenhouse gas emissions, or I should say the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments is counting up its greenhouse gas emissions. 57%, a little more than half, are associated with energy use in commercial buildings and residential buildings, which is why David and I are excited about trying to work on this area. And going back to the annual energy outlook report from USEIA, here's what they project for the residential and commercial building sector. And you'll see they're projecting that under current law, current trends, it stays pretty consistent. And about half of the emissions, or excuse me, half of the energy consumption is associated with electricity, and most of the rest is associated with natural gas, with some other stuff thrown in there. And here's what they project for electricity generation and for vehicle sales. Whoop, I'm going the wrong way. So electricity generation, natural gas, renewables grows, but even by 2050, they're projecting that natural gas, even coal, are still out there accounting for close to half of our electricity generation. And as much attention as electric cars have gotten, it's still largely gasoline out through 2050. So there's a lot of electrification that needs to happen, both for electricity generation and for transportation. And in the built environment for Alexandria and the rest of Virginia, we're fortunate in that the state legislature just passed, actually I'm going to go back to the previous slide for a second, just passed the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which should change what this looks like, what this graph here on electricity generation looks like for us here, which is a huge, huge help, obviously. It should be noted, though, that that only applies to electricity generation, and I don't believe there's any language in there in the Virginia Clean Economy Act on use of natural gas for water heating, space heating, and it's also my understanding that natural gas use is still going to be allowed in certain cases for grid reliability purposes. I need to do some more research on that, but it's not clear that that's going to completely eliminate natural gas and fossil fuel use in the built environment. So going forward again here, Alexandria's current green building policy requires, I might be getting this backwards, but I think it's LEED Silver for private buildings and LEED Gold for public buildings. And that was adopted in 2019. There was a study done on energy use in LEED certified buildings in Washington, DC, which this graph is taken from that same year that just came out recently, where they took advantage of the fact that DC requires buildings to report their energy use, and they lined that up with the registry information for LEED office buildings. This is all office buildings in DC. And they were able to go back and look and see, all right, well, how much energy did these buildings use? How much energy did other buildings use? And what this graph shows you is what the distribution curve looks like for energy use intensity, how much energy per square foot these different types of buildings used. The blue curve shows you the distribution for what LEED Silver buildings used. Gold is LEED Gold buildings. The green curve shows you the distribution curve for energy use intensity for LEED Platinum buildings. And they compared that to non-LEED buildings. And probably the most important thing to understand about this graph is that being towards the right end of the graph is not the direction you want to go. You want to go towards the left-hand side of the graph with a lower energy use intensity per square foot. So one of the quotes from the journal article is that collectively LEED office buildings at all levels of certification consumed more energy, more source energy and more site energy compared to other non-LEED office buildings in the district. And going back for my last slide before I turn things over to Shanti, this is another slide from the annual Energy Outlook report that I mentioned. And this shows the delivered energy by end use sector, another way they crunch the numbers, industrial purposes, commercial, residential, transportation. And I think one key point about this that this helps illustrate is that if we want to get our greenhouse gas emissions down in half by around 2030, we know how to make net zero buildings. And you'll hear from Shanti and Jonathan about that here after I stop talking. We don't know how to make net zero steel factories, semiconductors, airplanes, a host of other things. So buildings is one area where we know what's possible now and we can do it. And I would argue we need to start doing it ASAP. So with that, I am going to introduce Shanti. Shanti is a research and mechanical engineer at the National Renewable Energy Labs, and his work focuses on building energy efficiency. And he is one of the lead author, if not actually, I think perhaps the lead author of NREL's Guide to Energy Master Planning of High Performance Districts and Communities. And we're very happy to have him here with us tonight. Shanti, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks for having me. I hadn't seen that lead chart of buildings in DC versus non-lead buildings in the site EUI. I wanted to ask lots of questions, but maybe I'll save that for the end here. Is that all the zero energy and passive house projects that didn't get lead that were bringing the average down, maybe something like that. Okay, so yeah, thanks for having me. I'm an energy efficiency researcher at NREL. I've been here 21 years, focused on zero energy buildings research, and then more recently got into how to take zero energy buildings from building scale to a community and campus scale. And you guys can see that, and I need to figure out slide advance here. There we go. So you're probably familiar with that building, this building here, a great area example of a large-scale net zero urban project. Pretty expensive, first of type of project, technically proving it can be done. And so, that's an example in an urban environment in a hot, humid climate, that's proving it can be done. And so our goal on the research side is to understand how to take these technologies, put them together so that all the buildings around it, right, can also, attempt to get to this level of performance. And so part of my job is to work with high performance communities, districts, and projects like this, learn about what their innovative strategies are, and then write about them and put them into guides like the guides you see here from our professional societies of the Mechanical Engineering Professional Society, ASHRAE, Architects Society, the lighting designers, the green building folks. The U.S. Department of Energy funds us to participate in this and do a lot of the modeling and support the committees of our peers that design and build these buildings, bring these strategies together and have a series of best practices out there for reaching these levels of goals for all climate zones. And so that's been kind of one building at a time, what I've been doing for the last 10 years, basically. And so more recently, though, we've been wanting, as you've heard, the need to accelerate this. We can't really get there doing this one building at a time. And so, how can we take these concepts and ideas that we've developed for individual zero energy buildings and think about them at a broader scale so that we can accelerate, right? And so, our friends over at Eco Districts, a great nonprofit that has a lot of great resources for communities thinking about this. This is their quote there about why the district, that district is an optimal scale to accelerate sustainability, in that it's not really a whole city level. You're not trying to make, massive change, for thousands of buildings across the whole city, but you are having bigger impact than, doing one building here and one building there, right? And so it's allowing us to accelerate if nothing else. From a kind of an energy efficiency opportunity, you'll hear some about this going forward. To introduce you some of these ideas and concepts. What we're after is additional opportunity that you don't get in doing one zero energy building at a time. And so there's lots of opportunity for getting the benefits of upfront planning so that you really figure out the opportunities and the feasibility of different systems when you have a chance to really get it right. And because you're gonna be stuck with it going forward when you build out the community. So getting that right is really critical. Economies of scale, really, there's lots of benefits here doing this at a larger scale in terms of the economics and the cost of some of these strategies. Low diversity opportunities when you're thinking about peak demand across multiple buildings that are peaking at different times. You get benefit there when you think about it at a multiple building scale. And as you'll hear in some of our examples and case studies going forward, lots of available waste heat floating around cities that we can capture, but we have to think about it at a community scale to really make use of it cost effectively. On the research side, one of the things we've spent a lot of time thinking about at NREL here is using these projects and communities as test beds for additional technologies that otherwise we can't cost effectively think about in individual buildings. How to engage with utilities and utility programs that want to find the next type of efficiency opportunity that they can incentivize and really latch onto that supports customers as well as the utility goals. And also test beds for new business models and ownership opportunities. You'll hear a lot about thermal utilities as we go forward, and how new money and new business opportunities for ownership and financing and operations of this type of infrastructure is bringing in new business models. So great innovation there. So the Department of Energy in the Buildings Technology Office, who funds a lot of my research, they sponsored what they call an accelerator over the last 3 years, focused on zero energy districts, where they brought together like-minded communities and specific district energy planners across the United States here, a couple in Colorado, a couple in the Northeast and the West Coast. And they all committed to deep levels of energy efficiency and sustainability, high performance, zero energy, and brought their teams together over the course of 3 years to tackle some of the challenges that come along with thinking about energy planning at a community scale. Lots of challenges around utility engagement. That's usually the first thing that comes up, is how do we get the utilities involved, because we are building energy infrastructure here, and a utility on your side and a community scale project really is a critical part of all of this. And so a lot of these communities were struggling with that, and how to engage their local utility. And, we've got different utility models across the United States, which doesn't help things, right? So something that works in the Northeast in Virginia doesn't necessarily work in Maryland or in New York City, right? And so what other things that came up? Who's got the money for energy planning, right? The financing, ownership, and governance models was critical. This is a new way to own infrastructure, and with new business models always comes challenges and kind of figuring this out. Lots of analysis needs, how to model all this, how to quantify the benefits and of ongoing performance, and accounting for, if you don't meet the goals, what happens? Who can you certify at this level? So and how to get beyond typical energy planning or typical master planning processes that aren't really buying into the and really doing the deep dives into the energy opportunities at the community, at the planning stages. And so worked with them over the course of 3 years to really understand what those barriers were, and then latched onto some key promising practices that the partners would bring forward, documented those. The initial publication here was an internal white paper. You can see the link there. You can download it. Communities of the Future: Accelerating Zero Energy District Master Planning. So that document really allowed us to kind of set up some of these promising practices around these different topic areas. How to take energy efficiency strategies to beyond just the basic, lead minimums, and really embed them into your energy planning documents, whether it's a design guidelines for the community or a master plan for the community, and really get detailed energy use intensity requirements and PV generation, solar production generation requirements built into your planning documents, right? It's kind of what we're talking about. Oftentimes, we are thinking a lot about the opportunity for district energy systems. That could be lots of different types of infrastructure, but in general, ways to share energy, thermal energy or electrical energy at a community scale, rather than having 1 meter at one building, right? And everyone else, everyone kind of trying to get to these goals on their own. Lots of opportunities, especially around this capturing waste heat that's available at a community scale. All this requires deep community engagement and again, innovations in financing and ownership to make it all happen. And bring your utility along as well. This idea of a lighthouse project, we saw that multiple times, where the first building you build in the community, these are usually 5, 10, 15 year long, planning and construction efforts, and getting that first project that comes up out of the ground right, and making sure that it kind of proves out and solves for a lot of these challenges is critical, because it becomes the example project for all the future development that happens in that community. So those initial projects are really critical to pave the way, if you will, for all the future work that happens in that community. Yeah, so there's a link for the guide. It's available on public. It's when you print it out, it's a pretty big thing. So I got a couple of those for my desktop copy here at home, but it's a big PDF as well. So take a look at the link there. And it's it's kind of what our final publication here out of that 3 years of worth of work and everything we learned, and put into a more of a user-friendly guidance document rather than a white paper for academics and researchers, right? To really put these strategies in a meaningful way out to the industry, so that others can learn from this. Yeah, we also talk about what type of analysis you can do and when, document those promising practices with lots of case studies. Just a quick snapshot, what you'll see when you start kind of looking through this here. The team is critical, and the planning teams that are out there are usually you start with that, but there's also a pretty deep dive into energy planning opportunities that require beyond just normal urban planning folks to participate in this, and even partners on ownership models of thermal utilities, for example. Your local electric utility are critical partners at that early stage. So pulling together a team, getting the goals set is critical in that early stage. A whole chapter 3 here on innovative financial and business models for owning and developing and financing communities like this. A range of third-party ownership models that we've documented and provide guidance on. A whole chapter on, engaging local utilities in support of this. And so that's a critical part of it. And then the meat of the guide that kind of gets into the detailed energy planning opportunities that are out there for communities to really go beyond one building at a time is, what's an energy master plan look like? How to set it up, what kind of components to include, what other energy master plans have been developed previously for other communities, and what they included. So there's lots of examples, master plans there in that chapter. Chapter 6 has just kind of how to bake in aggressive energy efficiency goals like passive house or EUI targets, energy use intensity targets. Sorry for those of you who aren't in the weeds of all this. Kind of setting energy goals for your building by building type, and you can put those into your early planning documents, really drive design development going forward. Let's see, a chapter on district thermal energy planning. This is where you're able to build infrastructure in the street usually that take advantage of things like simultaneous heating and cooling across the community, things that individual buildings typically don't have an opportunity to do. But if you have the right type of community with the right type of loads, you can take advantage of that and harvest that waste heat. Final chapters here around grid integration, energy storage, and so a lot of the microgrid work. There's a lot of resources out there on microgrids. We weren't really focused solely on microgrids. It's a key part of energy planning up front and needs to be part of it for sure. Lots of resources out there on community scale microgrid planning. Definitely mentioned that, but also got into things around all electric buildings and grid integration and such of those buildings to support the issues that happen on the utility interconnection with lots of zero energy buildings all backfeeding at the same time. Renewable energy integration, it ends up being a pretty significant part of a master plan in terms of the space allocation. If you want to cover every roof and every parking spot and as much area available, getting that planned for at the very beginning as you're laying out a community is a critical part of that. So a whole chapter on energy planning for your renewable energy systems. And then have a suite of case studies that are all under construction or have been built across the United States. A couple pages on each of these on their innovation and what they've done, or their their energy master plan that they put in place and what that enabled them to implement a range of new construction. Most of these are new construction or major renovation. Handful are existing communities trying to renovate their old stock to take advantage of some of these opportunities. Existing communities definitely look different for sure. Okay, final few topics here. That's the guide itself. You can talk more about it, take a look at it. Let me know if you have questions. Happy to. There's a lot there, so this is a quick snapshot of what's there. You'll see something called UrbanOpt mentioned, and I just want to have a few slides here. This is how energy planners will try to model the various components that would go into a community in terms of all these technologies and systems and how would they all work together. So you can really get a sense of how they might work when you're trying to figure out your energy strategies for a community. So something that we develop here with DOE and NREL to enable energy planners to really dive into how much solar, how much batteries, how much efficiency, what happens to the grid if we make all these buildings all electric. Those types of technical barriers that historically we weren't able to answer, now be able to really provide tools for the industry to really get at that. Yeah, some details there of how UrbanOpt works, but and kind of when you start laying out a community and trying to figure out architectural planning, community layout, at the same time utility infrastructure, thermal utility infrastructure, where renewables go and such are all part of that energy planning analysis that you can now do. I'll end with an example, and this all sounds great, right, from a researcher and putting it in paper, but to actually get projects doing that at scale is, I think, just as meaningful, even if they're not in your area. This is a project in my backyard here in Colorado, a large city of Denver-owned exposition center, as well as a research campus. And so, and under construction right now, it's called the National Western Center. So their commitments here as part of being a city developed project is all city of Denver projects have to be LEED Gold or better, right? So that's going into it, that's a minimum requirement for that district. But they had some unique opportunities on the system side where they are able to take advantage of waste heat from a city sewer system to provide a significant amount of the heating and cooling, right? And so we're able to electrify the full campus with a waste heat source that's a pretty cost effective. But there's also an innovative business model to be had in terms of a public-private partnership to bring a partner in to finance and operate that system. The city has 100% renewable electricity goals, right, for city-owned and citywide on the carbon side. And so both with on-site and off-site solutions, it's critical, kind of the on-site and off-site balance is always an important part of all this. And then a significant amount of community engagement and a disadvantaged community in Denver that historically has not had much investment has been now able to take advantage of a lot of this great energy planning investment and supporting energy planning and resiliency planning. So yeah, a quick slide here, what it takes to utilize waste heat in your city's sewer infrastructure. So this is all of City of Denver's waste heat goes through pipelines. You can see there an example of some of those the wastewater pipelines. That's roughly 60 to 75 degrees year round. And as part of part of the infrastructure improvements of this community in this district, they're able to engage with a third-party energy provider to add all this hardware you can see here, a screening system, a heat exchange system, piping in the ground to distribute that heat to each building. So then each building can, up to 90% of that heating and cooling for each building can be basically free wastewater heat that's been, or cooling that's been collected from an otherwise unused resource, right? And so that's really only possible at a community scale, doing upfront energy planning before any building's really designed, right? You're thinking about the feasibility and the business model to enable a system like this. But it enabled the community to go to all electric and net zero, and then engage with the utility on other innovative community engagement programs around energy resiliency. where the utility is able to partner with community buildings to provide backup power through battery-based microgrids that the utility owns and operates, but then the facility gets basically free backup power. And so a great program that our utility is partnering up with that community around. So last slide here, and our utility here, you talked about this, Scott, in terms of your utilities in Virginia committing to trying to decarbonize the grid. Our utility here in Colorado, Excel Energy, they're also in Minnesota, has made a commitment to this a couple years ago, actually, for one of the first major utilities to commit to 100% carbon-free electricity and 80% by 2030. So in the next 10 years, they're going to get to pretty far along this goal. And so on the building and district side, things like all electric, grid integration, distributed solar where it makes sense, and high efficiency are critical parts of that overall approach in a community scale. So quick snapshot of some of the work we're doing, and here's our campus here at NREL. If we ever get a chance to come out to Colorado, let me know. I'll show you around when we should open up back in the next couple months, I think. So with that, I'll turn back over to Scott, I think, and we'll continue on. I'll be around at the end for questions.
Thank you, Shanti. So now we're going to hear from Jonathan Arnold. Jonathan is dedicated to the cost-effective creation of environmentally and socially responsible real estate. And under his leadership, the Arnold Development Group, which you see the slide there, recently opened a 330,000 square foot multifamily apartment complex, considered to be the largest building in the world meeting passive house standards. So Jonathan, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be sharing with you all the work we've been doing. And to jump right in, what I'm going to talk about is what we see as the changes in demographics and housing preferences that are driving real estate development today, and how climate change is affecting and creating opportunity to do things differently. And then focus on a replicable model that we've developed for building the type of buildings that the majority of the demand for the next, say, 20 years is presenting itself in the US, and then how we're scaling that model throughout the US. We are a real estate development company. I was originally trained as an architect, and I quickly realized that architects didn't make enough decisions in my mind. So if you can't beat them, join them. And I went back and got a master's in real estate finance. And now the left side of my brain fights with the right side of my brain to deliver high performance, highly resilient buildings that are addressing climate change and income inequality. So what do we see as the drivers of real estate today? We all know where we've been. From 1950 to 2010, we've been in love with the automobile and had what we thought was an endless suburban sprawl. Fortunately, that is changing. What most real estate research groups say and demographers say is that from 2010 to 2040, it's really a reversal. To the same scale that we left the cities over the next 30 years, we're returning to cities. And this is largely driven by the fact that we have a lot less children in our households today. In 1960, 48% of our households had children. By 2030, that number is dropping to 27%. At the same time, when polled, 75% of the US population says they would prefer to live in a place where they could walk to some things. This love affair with the automobile is kind of waning. We're reconnecting with the fact that we are social beings. So when you put that demand up against what our current supply is, we see that there will be this negative 27 million homes. There will be a negative demand for 27 million homes around our periphery and our outer exurbs. At the same time, there'll be a pent-up demand by as soon as last year, according to Chris Nelson, of 45 million housing units that are in walkable urban places that have yet to be built. So a lot of our colleagues and competitors are using what we call the last generation development model. They're taking the same technology that was deployed in the suburbs and bringing it into our central cities, largely wood frame, fairly disposable buildings that use a lot of energy. They're selling them quickly. Hold on a second. And they don't care about the energy consumption or their lifespan because they're not there anymore. They've sold them to a pension fund or a life insurance company. And these buildings, as we know, they're not flexible. They can't change use. All of their walls are load bearing. They're fairly thin, they're poorly insulated, and they rot. They are largely waterproofed with tape and a couple other things that don't last a very long time. And what they end up doing is over 20 years, they begin to have huge long-term maintenance exposure. They're largely built with cardboard. OSB is kind of wood chips and glue. We compare this to other major cities around the world that have built buildings that last hundreds of years. We really don't see this as a sustainable model moving forward. I mean, the embodied energy, the energy consumption is enormous. So as a company, we asked, how should we build this next generation of housing? And we were fortunate enough to be asked to work with a group of sustainability leaders that was convened by the Rockefeller Foundation, and that eventually got asked by the United Nations to go around the world and crowdsource through their network what are the technologies that are ready to scale to address both climate change, resiliency, and income inequality. And that was a fantastic exercise to do. And what we discovered in doing this is that we have all the technologies to create long-lasting, resilient environments that address climate change. But what we need are profitable models that can be replicated. There is not enough philanthropic dollars to solve this problem. And I put this cartoon up because for some people that still believe that this is some sort of, hoax that needs to be debated, if we do all these things, it doesn't really matter whether you believe in climate change. If we're building a better environment and it's more cost effective, we should be doing it anyway. And so we've taken these lessons, these best practices, if you will, and built a long-term investment philosophy. And it's largely centered around four major pillars. One, use what the Germans have been doing with Passive House and super insulating the envelopes. To put it simply, put a sweater around the building and drop your energy cost by 70% or more. Two, take advantage of every opportunity to integrate green and amenities that you would find in the suburbs into the city. So it's green roofs, urban parks, landscape your buildings tremendously. It helps with water runoff. It's a fantastic amenity and it builds great, strong communities. Third, these buildings have to be attractive. You cannot build dense projects that are efficient and economically work and great for the environment, but if they're not beautiful and they don't give a great livability factor, it's all for naught. No one's going to want to live there. And third, concrete seems to be the material that has the ability to have both a resilient factor and last hundreds of years with great adaptive quality. So our projects have columns spaced approximately every 25 feet. We can use it for parking, for retail, for education, for residential, and those buildings can adapt and change over time, which is a really important thing when we are thinking about structures for cities. So what are some of these best practices we have been discovering? Well, it's probably no surprise that some of these things are not new ideas. The courtyard building, if we're thinking about how do we create dense, walkable, mixed-use places that are highly livable, when New York City was developing and urbanizing in the Upper West Side, a group of developers got together and said, let's redefine what an apartment should be referred to as. And previous to these buildings being built in New York City, you either lived in a brownstone or a tenement. Instead, these folks drew from Europe and built these courtyard whole block buildings that had these amazing inner courtyards that are these oases with landscapes, birds, fantastic habitats. And then right outside was the hustle and bustle of everything that you would want, all just a few quick steps away. And 100 years later, these buildings that were built at the turn of the last century are some of the most valuable real estate that exists in the world today. They were built to last. They were built well with people in mind. This is not a new concept to New York. If you look at Paris, this is how major European cities were built. The courtyard typology of great, as Jane Jacobs said, defensible space, that you live with a public realm, and then you have these courtyards, that you have your community that is more human scaled, 30 to 40 apartments, or maybe up to 150. Barcelona is built on the same typology with, again, great public realm density that it allows the storefronts to stay in business, the coffee shops, the dry cleaners, the grocery stores to all have enough people needing to patron their businesses, but yet you have these inner kind of redefined backyards, if you will. This is Las Ramblas, where you have all of these people living, people are walking. You don't really need an automobile to get around. So we took some of those basic tenets and a few more that I'll talk about more in detail. And we said, we don't want to talk about these best practices anymore. We want to put them all together and build them. Because if we don't build them at what's called an institutional investor scale, which is north of 250 apartments, it's hard to say that they actually work if you don't ever build them. So Second in Delaware is a project that we started in 2015 and opened it last year. And it is 276 units. At the time, I think even to today, it is the largest passive house certified structure in the world. It is located a block from a streetcar in downtown Kansas City. The farmers market is a block and a half away. It's in one of the oldest neighborhoods of Kansas City, highly walkable, highly livable. And it is a courtyard building. We've stair-stepped it to take advantage of solar orientation. The lower four-story section is to the south. The entire fifth and sixth floors are landscaped areas, both fifth being raised planting beds, the sixth being kind of a hotel top amenity space, an extension of each person's apartment. And then the roof of the sixth floor is PV that allows us to get to our passive house. We're also large proponents of not building on every square inch of the block, so we've created a community park between us and our neighbors. And then we have space for greenhouses that will be part of a phase 2. Because this is nestled into an historic district, we built the new construction building to look like a warehouse that had been there for 100 years. And the courtyard, which is the size of a regulation size professional soccer field, is kind of the backyard redefined. Places to have movie nights, to outdoor dine. And if you have small kids, they can run around in here and you don't have to worry about them running into traffic. It's a great example of defensible space. And there's a pool that overlooks the Missouri River. You can swim and kind of watch cars and boats go by. The interior is a combination of modern and some sort of classic shaker style cabinets. You'll notice here that we've exposed a fair amount of concrete, kind of accent walls. We find that if we put drywall everywhere, we're picking walls to several walls to paint gray, and this allows us to kind of have that decision for us. And I'll talk about the benefits of exposing some of this concrete in a minute. The units are spacious. They're not overly small. They're designed to be attractive for both empty nesters and young professionals. combination of studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. And another best practice we learned is passive house. And the best way that I have found to describe passive house is comparing it to what it's not. So our current development model in the US is you build out of 2x4s, which gives you in total a 5-inch wall, and you put insulation in there, and you have a very large air conditioner or heating unit that runs pretty much all the time. Passive house flips that around. You have 16-inch thick walls with a little tiny heater or air conditioner that hardly ever runs, and you can drop your energy consumption from $119 to $26. In essence, you're putting a sweater around the building, and you're both reducing your mechanical costs because your air conditioning costs a lot less, but more important than that, you're reducing your operating expenses, which is how we're able to do this and have a higher profitable model than the current business case. So one of the things that is important to passive house is identifying thermal bridges. This is places where you have high density materials like concrete that would sometimes just go out to the exterior of the building. And you have to identify all of those places, some of which you can't avoid. You have a column coming through the garage. It has to be concrete. It can't be foam. And you have to design for those and try to minimize those bridges as much as possible. But places like going up the wall, over the roof, connecting, and then going over the other side of the wall, with the right architects and the right consultants, you can design these details so that this sweater is continuous. And if it stays continuous, you avoid having energy leak out in places that reduce your overall R value. So this sort of rigor is important, but it doesn't necessarily drive costs through the roof. It's just good planning and having good consultants that can tell you where you need to put insulation. And insulation is very cost effective. The other thing that passive house delivers is what's called thermal comfort. So you have, everyone knows of apartments or homes where during certain months of the year, you can't go into those places. They're too cold, they're too hot. Passive house, you don't have that. Everything is, because of the lack of thermal bridges, your floors stay warm. You don't have places where you are needing gloves to sit and watch TV or wear a hat. And a lot of people are being attracted to passive house, not because of the economics or the energy efficiency, but just because of the fact that these buildings are so much more comfortable and livable. And in essence, that's why we build buildings, because we don't want to be cold and we don't want to be hot. And passive house delivers that second to none. So if you compare a similar sized high-rise building to Second and Delaware, that has lots of thermal bridges, and this is just standard practice. You have concrete that goes right out to a curtain wall glass, and we build a glass skin, and it supposedly meets energy code, although I would question it if you really dug in. Second and Delaware is larger than this building, but this building needs 40 million kilobtu's of energy to be heated, powered, and cooled. Second and Delaware, because of proper planning and eliminating thermal bridging and building to passive house, we need 4.5. That is a huge reduction. And when 70% of our building emissions, carbon emissions, come from buildings, if we can, with proper design and adding insulation and putting the right size air conditioning, have this type of reduction, there's a tremendous business case and opportunity, which I'll show you in a few slides ahead. There's also a moral obligation to do the right thing here. We're talking about buildings that will last decades, if not longer, and with such an impact on the climate, we think that this is really the only way to build. We're not alone in this thinking. We're fortunate to have investors like Berkshire Hathaway concur with our thinking, and they are huge supporters of what we are doing and our major investor in Second and Delaware. Gershman Mortgage is one of many MAP lenders that does long-term, fixed-rate, low-interest, HUD-backed and insured financing that allows projects like this to cash flow very well over the long term. So these are a lot of numbers, and I'm going to try to walk you through the way we see the business case. So this first column here, if we look at Second and Delaware as an example, and these aren't the exact numbers of Second and Delaware, but it gives you an example of what we're doing and how we're thinking about it. 321,000 square feet, 276 units, have an average of 1,100 square feet per unit. This first column is our costs for a select number of divisions that get impacted by what we're talking about tonight. Second column is if you were to build it conventional stick the way merchant builders build. So if we take concrete versus wood, we obviously have a higher cost, $27 a square foot. Insulation, we have slightly more. Windows, we have slightly more. We have triple glazed windows. But if you look at our flooring, we have polished concrete floors. We have no flooring cost because it's all in the concrete cost. Our drywall is less because, as I showed you in that rendering, we expose some of our drywall, our ceilings, and our exterior walls as accent walls. Our exterior is lower cost because our concrete sandwich wall gives us practically our finished exterior wall. Our mechanical cost, and this is what's really interesting, is lower for passive house because we have less tonnage and less heating that's needed. So net, we look at $85 compared to 66. There is a $19 a square foot premium to building both passive house and a building that will last what we charged our designers with. It'll last more than 200 years. And we think this is important because the embodied energy in our buildings we build have a huge impact on the climate. So how do we pay for this $19 a square foot? Well, if we have a $119 market rate utility, so if you go to a building next door and someone is paying utilities and their rent, they're paying on average $119. We don't think that people will pay more to be green, but we don't think that they will expect to pay less. So we include a $119 utility in the rent, which means if you go next door, if you go to our project, you're paying the same utility cost, but you have a much lower carbon footprint if you're in one of our buildings. So we take the $92 a month savings times 12 months a year, comes out to $1,104 per unit in savings, times 276 units is $304,000. Multifamily projects are selling at a 4 to 5% cap rate, which gives us a $7.16 million increased value in the building from day one. Not in 10 years, not in 5 years, not in 20 years, but day one, an appraiser is valuing our building $7.1 million more, which is $22 more than the stick-built case, which is about $3 more than the stick-built business case model today. So if we can, and we can borrow all that money at 83% loan to value so that we're not having to put any more equity in these projects to do this because we can borrow it to do it. So you are having a higher first cost, but your lower operating expenses gives you a higher value and a higher profit margin. And if you look at this from a merchant builder standpoint, I'll just kind of cut to the bottom line. If you're building a stick-built building of this size, you're looking at a $4.2 million profit. If you're building a passive house concrete that lasts a lot longer with lower operating expenses and higher NOI, you have a $9 million profit. So we think that there is a huge market for this, and merchant builders will change one of two ways. One, that they wake up to this opportunity. Two, that life insurance companies, pension funds, and communities and city councils and planning commissions insist on this. They will have to get with the picture and build for the 21st century. But either way, they're able to make more money doing so. So amenities are a huge part of multifamily housing. And like I said, you don't have to live in a cave with a burlap shirt. You know, you can have all of these great things with these types of projects. And it becomes a very strong competitive marketing advantage. A lot of our colleagues are saying to me, great building, we're excited you got that building done, but can you stop taking our tenants, leaving our building and going to live in your building? and I kind of chuckle and say, market's going to speak how it will. So here is the finished project. We finished it in December. Happy to report we are 75% leased, which during a pandemic is a fairly, I think, strong sign. The residents have just started planting the raised planting beds, and the furniture is still being moved in. But it's everything that we hoped it would be, and it will be around for a very long time. So in summary, we're deploying the best practices that we know of today. We have a 90% reduction in energy consumption, built to last a very long time. We're integrating green roofs and in walkable neighborhoods, and that we think this is a replicable model that can be deployed really in any city around the world at a higher profit margin. Some of our next projects, we're now working on a net zero historic district that has a 12-story Art Deco building that we're going to put enough solar on the site to be able to deliver net zero and build to the National Park Service historics requirement. And another thing that I've sort of saved at the end is we also think it's important that we don't gentrify the neighborhoods that we work in. And we believe that at least 20% of the units that we build should be affordable. And so we incorporate low-income housing tax credits into our projects, and we make up for the lack of revenue through those tax credits. But we also provide great workforce housing, and it's also a great diversification tool because we're not relying solely on the high end of the market to fill our projects. So I thought I'd leave you with a couple things. If you are not in this industry, what could you do also to help? One is get an energy audit for your home and reduce your own home's carbon footprint. And if you're in the market for a home, place thermal comfort at the high end of your priorities, whether it's searching for a home or choosing an architect. Ask them to eliminate all those thermal bridges so that you can take the hat off and live anywhere in your house. And then also be active, have a voice. With social media, you have a tremendous ability to influence your city council and planning commissions to adopt rigorous zoning codes and energy efficiency codes. And remember, anyone tells you that in order to be green, you've got to lose a lot of money, tell them that doesn't have to be the case. You just have to do it intelligently with the right partners, and you can actually be more profitable. So with that, I thank you for the opportunity to share with you the work we're doing, and look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That's very, very interesting. So we're right at 8 o'clock. So why don't we have Q&A for 5 minutes or so. I'm going to jump back in and show a couple of slides, and then to the extent that people can stick around for more discussion, we'll continue a little bit longer. But for now, let me turn it over to David Peabody to start asking questions. And if you have one that you want to pose to the panel, feel free to post something in chat or in the Q&A section.
Well, those were two dynamite presentations, and both inspiring in very different ways. Shanti, I'd like to ask you first. We live in a city which has a very stretched staff. They are, money is tight everywhere, and it takes a lot of work up front to plan for a zero energy district. Are there resources available for cities, smaller cities like Alexandria, for example, to get help in doing this kind of planning beyond the book? In other words, is there government funding to hire people, and are there consultants available that the city could call on?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an industry that's emerging, that's stepping up to offer some of that. I think oftentimes the thermal utility companies that want to own and operate the thermal district in your community will do a lot of that work for you to get connected in. And so Yeah, it's and a lot of the communities that have gone through this planning process have some sort of philanthropic connection to a foundation somehow. I think, Jonathan, your comment about we can't fund this transition all off of philanthropic donations, but you can have meaningful impact at scale with a handful of districts in a community to really prove it out, so that the industry locally can grow and so that is important, I think, in terms of how these starter districts or initial projects get started, is getting that first one invested in. And as the industry steps up, the economics for the dollars for paying for the planning and the value that you get on the back end as well. And whether it's passive house codes or district energy feasibility analysis. I think understanding the value of that and trying to and bring that forward. I know in Colorado here, the local utility provides funding for communities to go through this energy planning process. And so that'll be highly dependent where you're at in terms of how the utilities want to support these types of communities. But utilities now have so many different types of programs to incentivize doing better, and that they provide resources and modeling expertise, analysis here in Colorado of how most of our districts end up being financed. Or not, sorry, the planning process, the upfront planning process end up being financed. And partly it's because the utility wants to have a connection into the master planning early on, so that early decisions around infrastructure can be made in a educated way with the utility. And so that's how I've seen it. I think there's always grants and always state, local foundation money available as well for the right projects.
Thanks. Jonathan, I love the financial piece at the end of your talk, and it's really inspirational what you've done and what you've achieved. And I guess if costs are really not the issue in developing a project like this, why are developers so resistant to building this way? And why do we constantly hear from developers that we can't, these are great, but these are experimental. These projects are sort of the future, but not quite ready for prime time. We'd like to do it, but we just can't afford it. It doesn't meet our business model. How do we answer when developers say that to us?
Well, I think you just need to say that might have been the case 25 years ago, that we didn't have the answers, we didn't have the research, we didn't have the knowledge. And now, for example, I really think that having the right consultants that have had a couple of these projects under their belts, that is transformative, because what you end up having is it's no longer a science project. It's something that you can point to and say, we've done this before, we can do it again. And let's face it, real estate development is one of the most capital intensive industries there is. And when you have a need for a huge amount of capital, comes with it a large conservative ethos, because no one wants to lose a large amount of capital. No one wants to go out on, the experimental diving board. But I think what we need to do is say, for example, that might have been the case, a while ago with electric vehicles. People would say, oh, that'll never happen, right? Or someone just had some experimental thing. Well, we now see that not only Tesla, but every major automobile manufacturer is, that's the top of their list, is how do we solve this and stay ahead. So I think we're in this transition period where we're on the backside of the mountain, and getting the right consultants and letting them do the education to the real developers and whatnot, to say that this is not an experimental, science project. touring existing projects. I mean, in your backyard, you have Stengel Engineering, who is our passive house consultant, who has done probably the largest passive houses in the US. Now, this one was even larger than that. Um, getting the right people on the team so that they can point to their past projects is probably one of the zero cost things that can be done to advance this movement. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to surround yourself with people that have done it before.
Very helpful. Very helpful. Scott, did you want to jump in here with some questions?
No, go ahead and do one more, and then I'll jump in.
Okay. There was something else that jumped out at me. If a developer is planning, I think I know the answer to this, but I want to hear you say it. If a developer is planning not to hold the property for 30, 40 years, but to sell the units and say, this is going to be a condominium type project, and I want to get out and get my money out in 5 years after I build this. So first cost would seem to be his greatest concern. How does that fit into this calculation?
Well, so if you're talking about a condominium project where you're selling to end users, people that are going to buy fee simple ownership in each unit, there's an educational component there to say this product that we're developing is going to first and foremost, I think, have a higher thermal comfort than the product across the street. And at the same time, you're going to have a lower cost of ownership. And because of that lower cost of ownership, you can pay a little bit more to have both thermal comfort, which you quantify that however you want. But the business case is that you're still making a better financial return based on this. So there's an education component. If you're not talking about condominiums and you're talking about rental property, which is the vast majority of what is being built right now, because it's pretty hard to get insurance to build a condominium these days. The lawsuits that come out of condominium developments make it very, let's just say, not attractive to do that. So we also have a rent by choice mentality because people are wanting and needing to be able to be flexible and move and be mobile. So I think the majority of those 45 million housing units are going to be for rent product that is largely bought and sold by institutional investors, life insurance companies, pension funds, and REITs. Now, they buy real estate based on what is the net operating income. And if you have a higher net operating income with a passive house project, they will pay you more for that. Not in 20 years or in 10 years, but today. So on the institutional for rent property, there's no education that needs to be done whatsoever. You simply do the appraisal, you show what the net operating income is. They then say, okay, I want a 4% return or a 5% return. 5% is easy because you multiply that net operating income by 20 times, and that gets you the value. So for every dollar of energy utilities saved, the REIT, pension fund, or life insurance company will pay you $20 more for the building. So that's not over 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. That's just today because they're looking at cash flow. That's what anyone who buys commercial real estate is looking at cash flow, not at payback. So passive house is the perfect example of creating value by increasing the cash flow of a project without adding more cost on a first cost basis. So you can be more profitable. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And I'm just thinking here in Alexandria, Virginia, we have about 73 million square feet of construction in the pipeline in various development projects that are somewhere along the pipeline. And looking at those numbers that you put out for the high-rise apartment building compared to yours, I think the factor was a difference in 10 in terms of the energy use. I mean, when you look at 73 million square feet and multiply the amount of energy or cut it by 90%. And if you're doing it as district planning in a whole energy district, I mean, it's unbelievable what the savings can be. So
Yeah, I think in order to get to net zero and with a renewable energy mix, if you don't take into consideration the lessons that the Germans have brought us with Passive House, you're needing to build 8 to 10 times more solar and more wind to get to the same carbon reduction. That's not cost effective. That's just land and all, like can we get there? But we should be doing both. We should be reducing our need from lowering our demand, and then getting to net zero by building renewables to zero out the carbon emissions on those buildings, and going beyond that, because we have a lot of buildings that are in existence today that are far less energy efficient, and we need to be cleaning them up as well. So I think we should be looking at like a net -3 to really get to where we need to be.
thanks, Scott.
That's very well said. So we're a little bit over where we wanted to be on in terms of time. Thank everyone for staying with us. I'm just going to show a couple more slides. And this may be information that some people already have, I suspect, but it's want to include it in this webinar. So the city has a very good website and does a really good job of making it easy for people to share comments. This is a screenshot of the city's planning department, planning and zoning department, which again is excellent at letting people know what's happening, what meetings are coming up, opportunities to engage in the process. And the biggest development, as I'm sure some of the people here know, that is right in front of the city and the planning department and the community, is the landmark mall Eisenhower West development. And there are meetings coming up next week and later in the month with planning commission votes for hearings and city council hearings in June and July. And here is how you can weigh in. David and I are convinced that energy planning is essential and important and should be a priority. So if you want to share your thoughts on what's been discussed today, share any other thoughts you might have, here's the contact information for doing that. So with that, I want to say thank you to Shanti and to Jonathan and to David for your excellent presentations. We'll try and make the PowerPoint slides and the recording available on our website within the next few days, and we'll let you know when that's up. And thank you so much for joining us.